Learn about Impressionists. Impressionism is a style of art, and there was a lot of people who were becoming Impressionists in the late 1800s, but mostly cool dudes with beards and some cool ladies. Impressionists were really concerned with light in their pictures, and they weren't as concerned with details. In fact, they used heavy brush strokes and lots of thick paint. And part of this was inspired by the new photography that was just starting. And so we'll talk about that more later. So some of the Impressionists were Claude Monet. Also, there was Pierre-Auguste Renoir. There was also Alfred Sisley and Frederic Bazille. These were kind of the first Impressionists. They were in Paris, and they were studying in the 1860s under this guy named Charles Glier. And so they were learning to paint from him, but they found out they all liked going outside to paint. And this was new. It used to be if you painted outside, that was just a sketch, just practice, and you painted a bigger picture off of that. And that was like the only way that was supposed to be the right way. You had to paint big, really detailed paintings. The Académie des Beaux-Arts in France were the ones who said what was good and what wasn't good in art. And they said portraits were good when people were just standing, looking fancy, and you painted them very detailed. And historical scenes were good and religious scenes were good if you showed exactly what was happening. They did not like still lifes. They thought those weren't good enough. They didn't like landscapes. They didn't think that was professional or high-class art at the time. They also didn't like lots of thick brush strokes and bright colors. They thought that was not good art, and they didn't want to see that. And so that is exactly what the Impressionists liked to do. They had lots of bright colors and thick brush strokes, and they weren't worried about capturing details. So the Académie des Beaux-Arts would have something called the Salon de Paris every year, and they would have a huge art show, and they would let people enter their art. And if you got in, it was very fancy. You became famous and got prizes. Well, the Impressionists were rejected. They were rejected a lot, and the fans of the Impressionists were starting to get mad. They were like, hey, we like this stuff. Why aren't these pieces getting in? And so Napoleon III, the emperor at the time, he saw that everyone was kind of getting mad, and he said, okay, we're going to make it so that the people can decide. And so they made a thing called the Salon De Refuse, which meant like the Salon of the Refused, or kind of the rejects room. This is like the losers that if you wanted to see this stuff, fine, we'll put it here for you, but it's not the stuff that got into the real show. So in December 1873, the Impressionists had had enough. They were like, okay, we're going to make our own place to show our art. And so they made the Société Animée. It's very long. It's a long name, and it just meant that it had artists, painters, sculptors, engravers, and they got to put their Impressionist paintings. Not everyone liked it. In fact, the reason they're called Impressionists is because there was a critic who saw Monet's painting called Impression Sunrise and was like, huh, Impressionists. These pictures aren't any good. They're like sketches, and he wrote a whole article about it. So if you see art and you want to know if it's Impressionists, check for heavy brush strokes, bright colors, and a little detail. You don't see a lot of close detail in Impressionist paintings. The colors aren't mixed a whole lot. They're just put on the page next to each other, mixed as little as possible. If they do mix the colors, it's to make dark tones because they don't like using black. They like mixing opposite colors to make dark browns. There's a lot of light in the paintings. Like we said in the beginning, Impressionists love showing the sunlight and the time with the light. It's usually nature pictures, not always, but often will be nature and outdoors. And they were using these new bright colored paints for the time, so they loved the bright colors. These are Haystacks by Monet, and he made a lot of them. And you can see here that all of them are showing different times of day and different lightings. And so even though they're just haystacks, they're all, you might think haystacks are boring, they're all different and interesting because of the way he showed the light in the pictures. And so we can see that depending on if it was morning or noon or night, if it was sunrise, sunset, how the color would play across and make shadows and make the bright and the dark. And so this was what the Impressionists really embodied, using the light to make your pictures interesting. At the time, photography was just getting started, so pictures were being able to be made like this, a portrait. And Impressionists were like, well, if cameras can do it, why should we make fancy details? Let's go the other way and make interesting colors and splashes. And so that's what they did. They didn't care about the tiny details. They were worried about getting the scene with the bright colors and the time of day and like a sort of a snapshot of what was happening. The people were all leisurely and in the middle of what was going on. And these artists would actually go out and they would paint in nature, or they'd paint watching what was going on around them. So this has been a little bit about Impressionism and how it started and what it's about. Well, thanks, guys. Bye.